My name is Larisa Alexandrova. I'm a postgraduate student of Samara University. The theme of my report is the legal capacity of a woman in Russia in the 11th and 16th centuries. The legal status of a woman in Russia from 11th to 16th centuries reflected in sources such as Русская правда, Princely Church Statutes of Vladimir and Yaroslav Vevais, Novgorod and Pskov Judicial Charter, International Treaties of Novgorod with the Gothic coast of the end of 12th century. The topic of the legal capacity of women in Russia during the period under review today traditionally arouses the interest of researchers and has an extensive historiography. Nevertheless, this topic has not lost its relevance today since many issues are still the subject of scientific discussion and are far from final resolution. The topic of legal capacity in ancient Russia is quite relevant. The most legal capacity was possessed by prince, then person close to prince, princess people, boyar, then lesser boyar. Limited legal capacity was possessed by the dependent population, purchasers and peasants. According to Русская правда, serfs are completely deprived of legal capacity. Social differentiation in criminal law is particularly clear. The law established different liability for crimes against a person standing on different steps of the social ladder. Thus, according to the Русская правда, for the murder of noble people, a double vira, 80 grivnas, is paid. For the main mass of 40 grivnas. There is also a category of people who was murder is paid not vira, but a special fine in a smaller amount, 12 grivnas. In order to different legal statuses, the legal position of a woman was primarily determined by being assigned to a certain social group. This treatment was carried out either by father or the husband. It should be noted that the legal capacity of man and woman within the same social group was different. This is well seen in criminal law, and the responsibility for killing a woman and a man was different. For example, Article 88 of the Русская правда establishes responsibility for the murder of a woman. If anyone kills a woman, the same court shall judge him as a man. If it is guilty, it pays half of the fine, 20 grivnas. Thus, only half of the fine was paid for the murder of a woman compared with the fine for the murder of a man. On the other hand, there was a double penalty for insulting a woman. According to Article 23 of the Charter of Prince Yaroslav Vevais, if anyone calls another's wife a shame word, there will be great boyars, so it is 5 grivnas in gold, and metropolitan people 5 grivnas in gold, and there will be lesser boyars, and for shame 3 grivnas in gold, and bishop 3 grivnas in gold. And there will be urban people, for shame it is 3 grivnas in silver, and bishop 3 grivnas in silver. And rural people, for shame 1 grivna in silver, and bishop grivna in silver. What is compensation was paid to the woman for the offense, as well as a fine to the bishop. As we can see, the punishment for crimes against a woman varied depending on her social status in society. Thus, the right of fortune was reported from husband to wife or from father to daughter. Thus, Article 2 of the Charter of Prince Yaroslav states about the church courts in the short edition. If anyone will take away a girl or take by force, if the boyar daughter it is for her 5 grivnas in gold, and the bishop 5 grivnas in gold, and the smaller boyars the 1 grivna in gold, and the bishop 1 grivna in gold. And if there are good men, then for a daughter's right to inherit after his father exists will Eastern Slavs and was a future of Slavic law. The Christian Church had a significant impact of the social situation of women during the period under review. On the one hand, the church actions were aimed at the elevation of the woman and contribute greatly to this, as the church fought against remnants of paganism that humiliated the woman, such as polygamy and concealment, and on the other hand, the church tried to place all both men and women within a certain framework, obliging the woman to obey the power of a man. With regard to marriage and family relation of the time of a time and the legal status of women in the family, reference should be made to the modalist of marriage. The economic order that preceded the pagan era was also defined by the position of a woman at the time. People were close to nature. They converged on the player rights and were soon without long ceremonies, with marriage made on both sides on the agreement alone. Water is often the only sanctuary of a union. According to Natalia Pushkareva, in ancient Russia, along within the abduction, there was another form of consolidation of the marriage union, marriage bringing, with the contractual elements. According to Samakvasov, the contractual wives who had a dowry were in a better position than the others, since they could freely dispose of their property and even had the same rights with the husband to divorce. Wives acquired by all the means will completely depend on their husband. With the introduction of Christianity, the church took over the regulation of marriage and family relation previously regulated only by customary law. Instead of pagan forms of marriage, abduction by water and others, church marriage come with its monogamy, difficulty of divorce and others. For example, we see prohibition of bigamy in the monument of canon law, the rule of Jan II, which says that you cannot take communion for those who continue to live with two wives without shame, because this is contrary to the current piety and decency of the Romani community. And also the prohibition of second marriage. About those who leave their wives and cling to others, you know that such is clearly alien to our immaculate faith and cut off from the church. Convince and teach them not once or twice, but differently and often until they repent and return to the good path. The forbiddance of bigamy is also contained in later monuments, for example in Stoglav. A bigamist is not wedding, but it is also forbidden to partake of the holy mysteries for 2 years, and the triune is 5 years old. In some surviving monuments of the period of the 15th centuries, one can see decreasing the woman, putting her in the position of secondary and insignificant figure in comparison with a man. If in the public sphere such views on the female justified the absence of women among those who could be engaged in the public affairs or in church services, then the private sphere they were expressed the prohibition that separated the female from the male. There were many such prohibitions, for example, menstrual and maternity taboos, which excluded women from visiting the temple on certain days. These taboos can be clearly seen in the monuments of canon law. For example, a question Kirik Sava in Delia with the answer of Nifon, Bishop of Novgorod, says, in the same you should not enter the temple in which the mother gives birth to a child for 3 days, and then let them go in, let them wash everywhere, and create a prayer that is read over a vessel defiled. Having made a purification prayer, let them go to the temple. It is necessary to say separately about the legal capacity of a widow in Old Russian law. Some scholars believe that in cases where a woman was not under the rule of a man, for example as a widow, she possessed legal capacity almost equal to men. In accordance with the commentary of Article 102 of Ruskaya Pravda cited by Yushkov, a widow has the right to live for life in the yard of her late husband, despite the objection of her children. She remains the head of the family and the custodian of all her property. Probably when they children achieve independence after dividing the property by will or law, she received a part due to her. Old Russian divorce law also arose along with the adoption of Christianity and the spread of wedding marriage, and all the secular and church authorities repeatedly intervened in the sphere of activity. The usual legal tradition remained the main regulations is church authorities could not insist of complying with church regulation in this area. In the letters of the hierarchs, they constantly see indication of mass practice violations of church prohibitions. Adultery was considered the main reasons for divorce from ancient times, which was determined differently for each of the spouses. The husband was recognized as an adulterer only if he had the side not only concubine but also children from her. A woman was considered to have committed adultery even when she came into contact with an outside man. The punishments for adultery were different. At first, the woman did not have the right to divorce because of her husband's infidelity. The guilty spouse was only punished with a year of penance and a fine. The husband had the right to divorce his wife who cheated on him. The clergy who thus admitted adultery not only had the right but were obliged to divorce in order to maintain their dignity. With regard to participation in civil transactions, being a sailor, it is extremely rare for a woman to alienate property only from her people. Usually she represents a family or clan community or is part of it. So in the same acts of Russian feudal archive, we find the following mention. Черница Anna making her contribution to the Kirill-Belozerski monastery in the 15th century by order of her husband or the Svet. Useful silver in people be divided in half. Half will be taken by the monastery elders, half of those people will be given. It follows from this that a woman, although acting on her own behalf, is on the orders of her husband. After analyzing the above monuments of law, we can conclude that with the adoption of Christianity in Russia, the legal capacity of a woman increased significantly, and although she still did not have equal rights with a man, such remnants of paganism as polygamy, consanguinity, and burning of wives with their dead husband went to pass. As for bigamy, although it was formally prohibited, it actually existed for a long time. Nevertheless, the personal non-property and property rights of women have significantly expanded. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Larissa, very much. This was an interesting paper about the medieval Russian law. We have a rather large scope from the Middle Ages to the 20th century in this session, simply because we somehow received the smallest number of medieval papers, and the largest number of those are in Serbian, and those will be presented later in the next session. So we decided to join this Central and Eastern Europe session to make it a slightly longer one, so as not to have mini sessions with 1 or 2 papers, because that wouldn't have a point. So our next presenter is Veronica Ondrashkova. My apologies if I mispronounce your name, from the Masaryk University Faculty of Law, and Veronica's subject is the role of women in codifications of the lands of the Bohemian Crown in the 17th century. Veronica.
Yes, hello, I hear you well, but I have a problem with sharing my content. Can you please help me?
Yes, I have to make you a presenter for that, and I'm doing this as we speak.
Oh, great.
Okay, so now you should be able to share your presentation. Yes, it's coming.
So,
okay, we have wonderful, thank you.
And
the floor is yours.
One last question. Can I move the slides? Do you see as I move it? Or
yes, I can see you as you move them.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me in this short period of time to introduce my presentation, which is on women's right to the dowry, with emphasis on loss of that right in the land law, which bound the nobility in the early modern era on the territory of the Bohemian Crown, as was said. So in my written submission, I analyzed different areas of the Crown and the codifications and the provision that are concerned with the loss of the right. But in this presentation, I would like to mainly address the case law and present a story that actually occurred in 1619 before the Land Court. And I would like to demonstrate the provisions of losing dowry on that case. But before we get to that, I'll have just a small introduction on the analyzed territory, which I'll be addressing today, and also about a few remarks about the provision that regard the loss of the dowry as such. So if we move to the first part, we see a map here. So this is the Bohemian Crown, and that would be the location of Czech Republic today. And the Bohemian Crown refers to the conjunct territory, which we can see here, that emerged around Bohemia, which is the red area, around 14th century, and it consisted of several regions that were either under direct or indirect rule of the king, and each of these regions had its own administrative structure. So this division is mainly important for the codifications because after the year 1500s, different codifications emerged, and those codifications were only effective in those regions that I'm showing you right now. So for Bohemia, it was Vladislav's ordinance, which we'll be looking on today. Its most important one. And for Silesia, only to mention that there have been number of principalities there. It's not a conjunct territory as such, but I have chosen to take under consideration the Ratibor one and Češin because those had the most legal effect on the area. But as I said before, today I'll be addressing only the Bohemia because of its importance and because also the article that is concerned with losing the dowry in that codification is the most eloquent one. So that's what I want to introduce and demonstrate on the case, which I'll be showing later. And of course, the territories had changed during centuries, but that's why I also chose only the key parts of the crown for the 16th, 17th century. So before I move to Vladislav's ordinance and the article concerning the dowry, let's make a few background on women and property in the crown as such. So as it was mentioned, the essential part for women was their dowry right, which they received from a family. But we can also differentiate between this family dowry, which I'll be addressing today, and then the dowry that she receives with her husband at her wedding day through an enrollment into land registers. But I'll be talking only about the family one, to be clear. And in regards to women and property, they can also inherit the family estates as such, not only the dowry that they had, but unfortunately they were only entitled to inheritance if all of their other male relatives were dead, meaning this could point out some of the inequalities that existed between men and women in the early modern era. So this is one of them. And in regards to dowry, because it constituted such a strong claim and such an important right to the women, it's codified in Vladislav's ordinance on many places, the gain and transfer of dowry. There are many articles dedicated to that matter, but there is only one article that actually is concerned with the possibility of loss of that dowry right, which will be regarding here, and it is Article 515. So if we look at the article, there are two possibilities by which a woman can lose her dowry right. So the first part states, if any woman would promise herself without the consent of her father, she shall lose any right to any estate that she held. Now, in general, this provision is not that surprising because it was codified in all of the codifications that I've looked into. And because usually the father was the one giving away the dowry. And if the consent of him wasn't present, then that obviously constituted a problem. But it wasn't an absolute, because if we look into the Vladislav's ordinance, we see that if the woman actually didn't agree with the opinion of her father, or it could be any other male relative that stood in the head of the unit that had the manage of the property, she could have appealed to the king, and in that case, he could have also ruled that even though she didn't have the consent of her father, she can still claim her dowry right. So, but this is quite obvious and self-giving norm. But if we look at the second part of the article here, and it states, and if any maid would lose her chastity, and that would be proven, she shall lose her part and any estate that she had right to. So this is the second possibility of losing dowry right. And so chastity was viewed as a key feature for women when entering marriage. It wasn't for men. as we can conclude, but it was closely linked to the women's honor and also to the family's honor, which would mean that when this would occur, the family would try to remain as much low profile as possible about the cases. So naturally, it would constitute a question if there actually are any cases in front of the land court from the time that are that actually uses Article 515, and how do they prove losing of the chastity of the woman? How the testimonies go? And because I structured the presentation, we already know the answer to this question, that there actually were some cases. But to be fair, we do not possess many sources on the matter. There is only one case, that is why I present it, because it outstands the others, mainly because it is quite bizarre, and at some point it made its way into Czech folklore songs. So that is why it wasn't forgotten for centuries. So if we demonstrate the use of the Article 515 on that case, but first let's make a small background to the story of the noble woman which I'll be talking about. Her name was Elizabeth Catherine, and she was born in 1590 to a family of 4 children. So she had 2 brothers, which one was demented, so he couldn't claim an inheritance, and then she had other sister. So she was born into a very wealthy noble house in Bohemia, which had quite a strong position in the 16th, 17th century at the time. But unfortunately, not only that she had title to this strong family name and status, she also got a long nose and limping walk. She was very unattractive, as we have some sources mention. We do not possess any paintings of her whatsoever, which would be quite surprising given the fact that she came from the highest nobility at the time. And because of these features, she had quite a problem getting married. Now, a rumor has it that once one of her suitors went to the Schmeritz castle to ask for her hand, and when he saw Elizabeth, he rather fled immediately and then married another woman from town the very next day. So she wasn't very popular given this fact, and this got her very frustrated at some point. So she started to seek the company of men outside of her status, which was outrageous, and outside of the castle. Now, it has to be noted, one of her affairs between 1607 and 1608, because I'll get to that later because it's important for the proceedings, it was between her and a castle blacksmith, George Wagner. And she was supposedly so in love with him, and she wanted to escape. But unfortunately, they were caught, and she was imprisoned for the rest of her life. First by her mother, and then by her sister, who cared for her very much. So they left her in prison for the majority of her life. And this would go unnoticed. The family tried to make this secret, like nobody knew. But unfortunately for Elizabeth, unfortunately for us and for the historians who came after, in 1618, when her mother and the father were already dead, and in 1618, her oldest brother had died. And as I said before, her younger brother was demented, meaning he couldn't inherit the property. He had to have a guardian. So when the oldest brother had died, Elizabeth all of a sudden became the one with the strongest claim to all the von Schmidt's property. And it was quite a high noble house, so it had many estates. So all of a sudden, she became quite attractive for the suitors for marriage, because she was the one to inherit with the strongest claim. So she got married. That's what got her out of prison, at least. She got married, and her new husband wanted to claim the castles and the estate that she could have got, and they did, actually. For half a year, they resided on one of the castles Elizabeth had title to. But unfortunately, her sister knew the provisions of land law quite well. And because also losing chastity was this disgrace to the family and to the women as such, so her sister wanted to claim all of the property, and that is why she brought a civil action in front of the land court. So now that's where the fun begins, because, well, first of all, it was her husband who brought the civil action, because although women could have asked or come themselves in front of the court, they were usually advised to take a male friend who will do it for them. So at this point, her husband went to the court, and they had to prove that Elizabeth has lost the chastity, because already at the time she was married, so it couldn't have been done under any examination, right? So when we look back at the article, and it has to be proven, there was only one living person at the time who can testify against Elizabeth and who could actually strip her of her titles. And that is why, in quite absurd way, 12 years after the affair, after 12 years, the blacksmith has been brought in front of the court to testify against Elizabeth and to describe in very much detail to the commission what he did to Catherine Elizabeth, because we do not possess many materials on the matter. There actually aren't many sources left, but the testimony we do have, so we can actually read in detail how it was conducted. And because the commission naturally were concerned, why didn't she get pregnant? Because the affair occurred for over a year, I think. So they asked him questions. So he very lightly explained how he did that. I did not translate those passages because I didn't thought it would be very appropriate. But if anyone's interested, I can send the link. Anyway, so he testified against her, and because of that, she lost the case, unfortunately. Even though the court had actually been in favor of her sister, Elizabeth lost the case because the land law spoke quite clearly on the matter. We've seen the article, so that was quite obvious. So unfortunately, so the story normally would end here, but it has a bit of a dramatic epilogue, because when they came to reclaim the castle from Elizabeth, it was the husband of her sister and the commission. Elizabeth let them in, and at some point in the evening at the castle, they were let into gunpowder storage because Elizabeth wanted to give the musketeers some gunpowder. And someone let out a spark, and half of the castle exploded, killing Elizabeth and killing the husband of her sister and other 40 people which were present at the time in the castle. So this is maybe why it's quite popular in the Czech culture, and it is well known, and it's made into actually a song. That's how it was preserved. But anyway, even though when we outlook this bizarre connection, we can see the strong position of the Article 515 and how it was actually used. Now, if we look in different land registers of Moravia, let's say it was the other territories of the Crown or Silesia, we also see that some of the cases appeared also there, even though it wasn't many. And in Moravia, for example, we can see that the women, once her chastity was not contained, let's say, she could have been forgiven by her father. In Moravia, it could have been done through a contract or through a written document. In Bohemia, it could have been done only orally, but it was the possibility. And I think since the time is up, yes, it should be. So I thank you for the attention, and if any questions of any matter arises, then I'll be more than happy to answer them in the discussion later. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for a very interesting presentation and an exciting case study. So now we're moving on to the 19th century, and our next participant is Dmitriј Dolgich from the Russian State University of Justice Faculty of Law, and his topic concerns Serbia, very interestingly, history and development of women's rights in the 19th century in Europe on the example of the Serbian Civil Code of 1844. Dmitri, do you have a presentation or are you just speaking?
Let's get started. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Serbian Civil Code of 1844 is most often considered in the literature is an abridged version of the Australian codification of 1811. The creator, Johan Hedgich, qualifies as an experienced compiler or even a copyist at best. In addition, he objects to the fact that by codifying it, he contributed to the collapse of the family cooperative, deprived the intervenants' rights.
I'm sorry, Dmitry, could you turn your camera back on? We don't see you.
Okay.
Or maybe I can do it for you. Let me see. Okay, thank you.
Restrict the business opportunities of women, etc. The Serbian Civil Code addressed its scope, which is a third shorter than Australian one. Its introductory provision, which differs significantly is in number and content from the Australian model. Its strong reliance on customary law, the undeniable presence of elements of other legal system, for example, adoption of Roman law, the influence of the French civil code, church law, and even Ottoman Sharia, and its language and terminology. Hedgich, attitude of all custom, has been a favorite leitmotif of his critics, starting with Shergolich and Matic, who they strongly resent for neglecting tradition and wanting to modernize the Serbian code too early. After Bogistić adoption of general property code of Montenegro in 1888. In that, in the wake of popular historical things, closely linked its codification to customary law. The SCE was an even stronger stamp. This attitude to the code became generally accepted until the 20th century, where there is no doubt the Prince Miloš commissioned Hedgich to draw up a codification that would be based on the usual rules. This is evidenced by the correspondence with Hedgich and Lazarevic, and with Hedgich in the already mentioned letter to Miloš from 1837. Hedgich promises the customary law will be the basis for a new codification. On the organization, the prince organized the famous poll. They gave a clear, conservative, discriminationary response from Serbian elders. Yet Hedgich pursued to the end and incorporated the modern concept into his final codification project. But contrary to his will and desire, the prince and the state council downplay that the final solution to the problem must conform the old usual established practice, where the ante-odium to the gender inequality only called falls completely injustifiably on Hedgich, not on these scientist debates, but all because of this Belgrade women swore and pecked wherever they gathered together. And when this issue was still socially problematic for almost 85 years after the adoption of the SCC, is appreciated object to Hedgich for the will of something else and the accordance with the dominant social attitude. As the mentioned traditional solution was included in the civil codification of Serbia. Despite all this, Hedgich has a mind to the lightning road for the SEC grievance, especially with regard to the aforementioned regulations, for which he is not in the least responsible. This created an absurd situation where Hadžić, on the one hand, was accused of disregarding customer law, and on the other hand, was simultaneously criticized for legal decision arising from the same customs. Hadžić, unlike Bogišić, deliberately and boldly attempted to balance tradition and the modern law. Regulations of the legal status of women and other sensitive issues which Bogišić would turn with a fundamental obligation, not to include family and inheritance law in the codification of property rights. Well, as this is already mentioned, Hadžić is constructs to the Austrian Civil Code, define customer law in an auxiliary source of law. This also pointed out the Perich, who is context acknowledges that the SEC has nevertheless departed from the source and seems to understand what Hadžić's definition of customs and the source of law is. In short, all attacks on Hadžić is a legislation who ignored customary law or did not understand it should have been used precedent. This would almost certainly lead to a revision of the headline view that Jovan Hadžić don't care about customs and tradition that have dominated our science and general proposition for too long. In summary, the Serbian Civil Code of 1944 was the first modern European civil codification in the 19th century, which was curiously issued so early in comparative legal history. In a small undeveloped country like Serbia, after many countries of Ottoman incorporation, and Serbian scholars usually treat like a kind of a broad version of the Austrian it's German name of ABGB, Australian Civil Code, same of 1811, and his companion Jovan Hadžić was often regarded as the best well-educated copyist. Other chief objective to his work were the SEC contributed to the dissolution of Zadruga, a specific type of patriarchal joint family. The paper tends to criticize accused to meet a negative perception of the Serbian codification and to explore the main causes of unfavorable promoting incidents. The author picks out specific feature of the SEC relevant for nationalization, pointing to many distinctive elements from two codes. The Serbian Civil Code introduced Serbia to current legal trends. All through Serbia's economic development was insignificant. It had a modern legal system. Since it was modeled of the Austrian Civil Code, Serbia initially followed the Germanic legal tradition. All through French law, a far greater influence on it, and the Serbian law nevertheless continued to form part of the Germanic legal tradition and corrupt an available portion of the European legal family. We have seen that Serbia was among the first European countries to have the codification of civil law. There was a special bond between countries that had legal codification, because they were all based on the idea of positive law, the tradition of Roman and Byzantine law, and many common cultural phenomena. They usually always to have stronger and at least Serbia undertook civil codification much earlier than many more developed countries. In the conflict between customs and more progressive ideas of the domain of family law and the law succession, customary law developed. Nevertheless, with the introduction of private property, all traces of feudalism disappeared from Serbia, which cannot be said of many other states of the time. And codification paved the way for a more rapid development of finance and trade relation, also influenced other spheres of life. At the end, Serbia built its relation with the other countries quickly and successfully. And at the end, thank you for attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. The next presenter comes from Vienna, from University of Wien Faculty of Law, and that's Ms. Sarah Stutzenstein, and her paper, The Long Way to the Custody of the Mother of Her Children in the Austrian Civil Law. You may have the floor.
Yes, hello. I try to share my presentation with you. I hope it works or will work finally.
Can you try changing it yourself? Can you change the slides? Okay, okay.
Please. Okay, that's great. Okay, I hope you see the presentation, I think. Okay.
Yes, we do, don't worry.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all fine. As the person, yes, as was already said, my name is Sarah Stutzenstein and I'm from the University of Vienna. What I'm going to talk about today is basically the admission of women to the guardianship of minors with the first partial amendment to the Austrian Civil Code just after the beginning of the First World War in 1914. This was one of the many demands of the bourgeois women's rights movement in Austria at the time. However, it was one of the very few which were at least partially fulfilled. Let me start with some general information on the rules on guardianship in the Austrian Civil Code from 1811. The first question is, who needed a guardian? And the Austrian Civil Code says minors who don't benefit from the care of a father. This means that legitimate children usually only needed a guardian if their father died, grossly neglected his duties, was absent, mentally ill, or something like that. But in general, the father of a legitimate child also acted as its guardian. Over illegitimate children, the father had no paternal authority, which means they always needed a guardian. Any guardian had to be appointed by the court. The next question is, who could become a guardian? A guardian, every adult man could, in general, become a guardian. The guardian essentially took over the responsibilities of the father concerning the paternal authority. His main tasks were the legal representation of the ward and the management of the ward's assets. In addition, the guardian was obliged to take care of the child's education. If the father had not made any orders, the guardian and not the mother had the right to determine the educational goals. And if the ward had assets, the guardian got an annual compensation. The Austrian Civil Code considered the guardianship as a public function, which required certain intellectual and mental abilities. Therefore, mentally ill persons, minors, convicted criminals, and also women were excluded from guardianship. The assumption was that the female gender lacked the necessary abilities to take care of the child's finances and to guarantee a decent upbringing. The groups of people who were excluded from guardianship, however, clearly show how low the Austrian Civil Code or its drafters assess the intellectual ability of women in terms of guardianship. It put them on the same level as convicted criminals, mentally ill persons, or minors. There were only 2 exceptions from the exclusion from guardianship of women. Married mothers and paternal grandmothers of legitimate children could become guardians if the father had not disposed otherwise and the paternal grandfather was also unavailable. This exception was justified by the supposed great love of these women for their children and the descents of their own sons who carried the family name. According to legislative materials, this love even compensated their limited intellectual abilities. For unmarried mothers, there was no such exception, and they therefore could never become guardians. There were some special provisions for the female guardians. For every female guardian, the courts had to appoint a co-guardian, which had to supervise and control the female guardian. And if a female guardian remarried, the guardianship could be withdrawn from the female guardian by the court. This does not mean that a mother who was not the guardian of her child had no parental rights or obligations. For example, the mother and not the guardian was primarily responsible for the children's physical well-being, their mental development, and their maintenance. Only in special cases, such as the unsuitability of the mother, the bad behavior of the child, or its special future destiny, the mother's right to raise the child could be withdrawn by the court. Until the end of the 19th century, these rules remained largely uncontroversial. Only then the bourgeois women's rights movement called for an improvement in the legal status of women within the family and concerning the guardianship. In petitions, the women's associations basically demanded a replacement of the paternal authority by a parental authority for legitimate children, which should be equally shared between the parents. According to this request, an appointment of a guardian wouldn't have been necessary if only one parent had been unable to exercise the parental authority. In this case, the other parent should automatically have the parental authority alone without a special appointment. The bourgeois women's movement also proposed the general admission of women to the guardianship. According to their demands, unmarried mothers should have the sole guardianship for their children, and a co-guardian should no longer be appointed for every female guardian, but only if the female guardian herself demanded a co-guardian. In addition, the bourgeois women's movement also cooperated with some liberal and socialist members of the parliament and tried to get their support and also to shape public opinion through periodicals. At the time, the Austrian Civil Code had been in force for almost 100 years without changes, and the demand for revision of the Civil Code became louder. Its rules on guardianship were especially unsatisfying, not only for the women, but also for the children and especially the state. Following the bourgeois family model, the appointment of the guardian for the fatherless orphan was considered the general case. The Austrian Civil Code or its drafters overlooked that a large number of guardianships would affect illegitimate children for whom the courts always had to appoint a guardian. While the married mother or paternal grandmother could become the guardian of a legitimate child or grandchild if the father had not disposed otherwise and the paternal grandfather was also unavailable, the unmarried mother could never become the guardian of her illegitimate child. Illegitimate children belonged by law neither to the maternal nor the paternal family, so it was very difficult to find a guardian for them. In most cases, the minors had no assets, so a potential guardian could not expect any compensation, whereas the few wealthy minors were desired wards, there was a lack of suitable guardians for the many poor children. The guardians who were appointed by the courts had no right to refuse the guardianship. However, many of them did a poor job and especially neglected the care and the upbringing of the children. Often they did not even know their place of resistance. By the end of the 19th century, so many children suffered from a lack of care that they were considered as a problem for society as a whole and a threat to state security. On the one hand, juvenile delinquency was high. On the other hand, the state of the youth weakened the economic and military potential of the state. So a huge discussion about child protection started. The legal scholars discussed the admission of women to guardianship as a possible solution. However, they had many reservations, and all folk that did not express it that way, I think they wanted to make sure that the interests of the male population were not affected. With the outbreak of the World War in 1914, the reform of the Austrian Civil Code's family law, and in particular its rules on guardianship, became all the more important because the male population was needed in the war and human losses were expected. So the first part of the draft law, which had been discussed in Parliament before, and it contained almost exclusively provisions relating to family law and inheritance law, was put into force by an imperial emergency ordinance. The first partial amendment to the Austrian Civil Code removed the general exclusion of women from guardianship to expand the circle of potential guardians, while the legislative amendment enabled women to become guardians. It did not bring a real equality of the genders concerning the parental rights and obligations, as long as the father was able to exercise the paternal authority and guardianship alike. He alone had the paternal authority. The greatest progress in the eyes of the women's movement was that if the father lost his paternal authority, the guardianship was primarily granted to the married mother instead of the paternal grandfather. Nevertheless, the father had the right to nominate another guardian, simply exclude his wife from guardianship, or demand a co-guardian for her. The specific regulations also show that women were still considered as less qualified than men to exercise the guardianship for a minor. A co-guardian could only be appointed for a female guardian. On the other hand, only women were entitled to refuse the guardianship for a foreign child if they considered themselves as unsuitable for this function, and only women needed the approval of their husbands if they wanted to take over or continue a guardianship for a foreign child after their wedding. With these rules, the first legislative amendment ensured that the interests of the marital father and also the husband of a potential female guardian were not affected. The legislature was particularly suspicious of unmarried mothers who, all folk entrusted with the upbringing and the maintenance for the child, had no legal claim to receive the guardianship as well. The courts could appoint her as a guardian if they wanted, but rarely did that, which was most likely to the still widespread prejudice that unmarried mothers had no moral qualities. To sum up with, the legislative change only went almost exactly as far as it was in the interest of the state, without restricting the marital father's supremacy. The far wider requests of the women's rights movement for real equality of the genders within the family were not fulfilled. Therefore, it's not surprising that the legislative change as a whole was uncontroversial within the male-dominated politics and legal science. On the other hand, the still existing discriminations of women concerning the paternal authority and guardianship were not lost on the women's associations and activists and heavily criticized by them. However, they considered their new possibilities as at least the first step in the right direction, and announced that they would continue to fight for a shared parental authority, unaware that it would take another 60 years until this goal was finally reached in Austria. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation. It was lovely. So the next presenter again talks about maternal and paternal rights, but this time in Czech Republic. Here I give word to Stepan Burda. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced the name correctly. And his paper is on maternal and paternal power in the interwar Czechoslovak civil code proposals.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. You got the name very correct.
Okay.
I'll try to share my PowerPoint before I begin.
Yeah, let's see if you can.
Does it work?
It's still uploading. Okay, can you try changing the
Sure.
slides just to see if, so I can see if you have control? Absolutely perfect.
Okay, great.
The floor is yours.
So thank you for the introduction. I would like to talk a bit about some of the family law aspects of the proposed Czechoslovak civil code in the interwar period. I would like to first establish what the legal position of the parents in regard to their children was in the law that was applied in interwar Czechoslovakia. And I would also like to compare that to the changes that would have been included in the civil code had it been passed, which ultimately it wasn't. And by this, I would like to observe how the legal and social attitudes towards the role of women as mothers and wives changed from the 19th century, which was the origin of most of the laws applied in the interwar period, and how they compare to the views that are prevalent today. Before we get to family law itself, I would like to talk a bit about why there was a need to create a new civil code in interwar Czechoslovakia in the first place. Well, before the First World War, Czechoslovakia was part of Austria-Hungary, and each of the two parts of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy had its separate set of laws. In the Western Cisleithian part and also Croatia-Slavonia, the Austrian Civil Code of 1811 governed family law. While in the East, in the Kingdom of Hungary, there was several statutes and case law, including Article 20 from the year 1877, which governed family law in Hungary. In October 1918, independent Czechoslovakia was declared in Prague. And one of the very first acts of this new state was to retain all current laws which were in effect, which was, of course, necessary to preserve legal continuity and of both government institutions and private citizens. However, this had the side effect which caused the creation of two separate legal systems in interwar Czechoslovakia, because the western part of the new country, the Czech part, followed Austrian law, mainly the Austrian Civil Code, whereas Slovakia and Carpathian Ruthenia, which were part of the Kingdom of Hungary before the war, followed Hungarian law. And this, of course, caused many problems having two separate legal systems in one country. So the work on a new civil code began almost immediately after the First World War. 5 subcommittees were formed, and each dealt with a specific issue, including one subcommittee which focused solely on family law. This subcommittee published its proposal in 1924, and this proposal is one of the main sources for my paper. However, it turned out that each of the subcommittees took a radically different approach, and a super revision committee was formed, which sought to create a unified civil code, basically put all the subcommittee proposals together so that they would work as a harmonic legal document, basically. They published their civil code proposal in 1931, but it underwent many changes after that, and it was presented to Parliament only in 1937. However, without the portions relating to family law, because those proved to be so controversial that they had to be omitted in order for the Civil Code to even have a chance of passing through Parliament, which ultimately it did not because of the Munich crisis and the start of the Second World War. So in interwar Czechoslovakia, a new Civil Code was never adopted. Now to the family law issues themselves. I will follow up on my predecessor here a bit, because under the Austrian Civil Code, minors were persons who were under 24 years of age, and their relationship to their parents was governed by basically three key concepts. One of the first concept is parental power. This is described as the joint responsibility of both the mother and the father, and this included things like physical care for the child, their upbringing, some of their education, and also disciplining the child, because according to the Austrian Civil Code, the child had a duty of obedience to both the parents, and both the parents could enforce this obedience. However, there was also paternal power, which belonged solely to the father. Its content can be divided into three main categories. The first category is vocational direction, which means that the father alone decided what career the child would pursue. So, for example, the father decided, I want my son to become a lawyer, so he decided he would go to law school. I want my son to become a carpenter, so he will go there. The second part was property administration. For example, if the child inherited something from a more distant relative, the father administered that property for the child, however, not in his own benefit, but for the benefit of the child. The father was also the sole legal representative of the children, which included consenting to significant contracts and even marriage, because since age of majority 24 was quite high, many people got married before reaching that age. The third key concept is legal guardianship. This can be thought of a bit simplified, but as a substitute for paternal power. When a child did not have a father who could exercise paternal power either temporarily or permanently, a legal guardian was appointed, basically with the same duties but with greater judicial oversight. They had to seek the consent of the court for many actions which the father would not have to do. Women under the Austrian Civil Code and Hungarian law. As was mentioned, mothers and grandmothers could become legal guardians, but no other women could under the Austrian Civil Code. The preference for choosing a legal guardian was first the one who was designated by the father in his last will. If the father didn't designate anyone, then the paternal grandfather was preferred over the mother initially in the Austrian Civil Code as it was enacted. And even if a female was a guardian, she needed a male co-guardian to supervise her. Illegitimate children did not legally have a father and thus had to have a guardian appointed. In Hungary, mothers were in a slightly better position because mother was considered to be the natural guardian of their children. There was also no concept of co-guardianship or supervision like in Austrian law. However, no other women apart from mothers could become guardians in Hungary. In 1914, as was mentioned earlier, all women became eligible for guardianship. However, they needed the consent of their husbands to assume that role. Mothers were now preferred over the grandfathers in the succession of prospective legal guardians, and co-guardianship was limited to certain cases, such as the request of the deceased father, the request of the female guardian herself, or if the duties of the guardian were so complex that the court deemed it necessary, for example, extensive property management. In 1919, the age of majority in Czechoslovakia was reduced to 21, which limited the amount of time minors spent under paternal power or legal guardianship. In 1924, the subcommittee proposal was published under the direction of Dr. Bruno Kafka from the German University in Prague, who was coincidentally a relative of the famous writer Franz Kafka. This proposal didn't make many changes to the Austrian Civil Code. They decided not to abolish paternal power. However, they added the option of mothers appealing paternal decisions to the court, because earlier when the father decided, for example, the career for their child, only the child themselves could appeal this decision. Now the mothers could do that as well. The consent of the spouse for assuming legal guardianship was balanced out. So now not only women needed the consent of their husband to become guardians, but husbands needed the consent of their wife to do the same. The other change was that co-guardianship was proposed as equal, so that male guardians could have a co-guardian and women could be co-guardians. However, these were the only major changes to family law that were proposed in 1924. In 1931, in the whole civil code proposal, which was based on the Austrian civil code still, but there were some more significant changes made to the family law aspects. The consent of a spouse for becoming guardian was abolished entirely. The reasoning that is mentioned is that while women don't need the permission of their husband to run for political office, to become judges or deputies in parliament, why should they need the consent of their husband to become the guardian of their nephew who was orphaned, for example? So this is the reasoning made in the documents of the committee. Mothers were much more strongly preferred as guardians in this proposal. It simply states that before anyone else, legal guardianship belongs to the mother. Fathers could no longer exclude mothers from guardianship in their last will, and there were very few reasons to excuse the mother from guardianship. Very interesting concept was maternal power. This was basically the same thing as paternal power. However, it only came to play when the father was absent or deceased. And if the mother was deemed to be fully competent to handle the child's affairs, she could be granted maternal power, which was a stronger position than legal guardianship, and made her basically equal to the father in her legal rights and duties. However, this was still criticized by many women's organizations because the woman had to be deemed fully competent, whereas men had the paternal power automatically, and it had to be proven that they were incompetent in order to have it removed. Even if a mother was not appointed as guardian and did not have maternal power, she had the express right to participate in the upbringing of the child in all cases. So what can we conclude from all these observations? Well, the changes in the interwar proposals were evolutionary rather than revolutionary. They build upon the Austrian civil code. They use the same terminology, the same institutes, the same concepts. They retain the distinction between illegitimate and legitimate children. They retain a special position for the father. However, certain adjustments are made to improve the legal position of women towards more equality. Family law in Czechoslovakia was unified only in 1949 and 1950 during the communist recodification of civil law, when paternal power was finally abolished. I would like to conclude my presentation with a quote from one of the most prominent Czechoslovak experts on civil law, Professor Sedláček, who in 1934 observed that since men and women have many differences, it translates to the legal sphere that their rights and duties should be varied also. And he claims that those who propose that women and men should be absolutely equal within marriage don't particularly understand the institute as he does. So this is, I think, a good illustration of what the contemporary attitudes towards marriage were in the interwar Czechoslovak legal profession. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This was a very interesting presentation, and this quote is really something to think about. So now we have our final presenter for today, Vyacheslav Adamovich from the St. Petersburg University of the Ministry of Internal Affairs Faculty of Police Training for Investigative Units. Vyacheslav, are you there?
Hello everyone, I'm glad to be at this conference. Today I'm talking about women who chose terrorism to fight a better society.
Please, do you have a presentation or are you just speaking?
Just speaking, no, I...
Okay, wonderful. The floor is yours.
The 19th century in the history of Russia was a time of important transformations and reform of the state and legal system of the country. Despite the implemented reforms, by the end of the 19th century, the tension in social and political relations was growing, and revolutionary activity was growing too. Secret revolutionary circles became more active, trying to influence the government by various ways and promote new changes in state structure of country. One of the ways to influence the authorities, the revolutionary-minded activists chose terror, intimidation of their political opponents expressed in physical violence and even killing. Terror was actively used by the revolutionary Народник organization Народная воля, operated in Russian Empire at the end of the 19th century. After the collapse of Народная воля, its successor, the SR Party, widely used this method to fight the imperial power. A combat organization of social revolutionaries was created within the party itself and was directly involved in the development and implementation of terrorist attacks. Women were active members of this organization. Of the 78 members of the combat organization in 1902 to 1910, were 25 women. They participated in the preparation of terrorist attacks and their execution. Terrorist attacks committed by women are known in Russian history. On January the 24th, 1878, the daughter of the staff captain Vera Zasulich shot at the St. Petersburg mayor Karpov and seriously wounded him. The reason for her action was an event that was considered by the revolutionaries as the arbitrariness of the high-ranking official. A political prisoner was flogged, which was a violation of the law. Vera Zasulich was tried for the crime, but on March the 21st, 1878, she was justified by the jury. Zasulich shot marked the beginning of the terrorist 5-year period in the history of the Russian Empire. Vera Zasulich was the first woman with a revolver in the Russian revolutionary movement. Sofia Perovskaya took part in the terrorist attack against the emperor. She directly supervised the preparation and implementation of the regicide on March the 1st, 1881. It was at her signal that the bomb was thrown into the carriage of the Emperor Alexander II. The explosion of this bomb caused fatal injuries to Alexander II. 28-year-old Sofia Perovskaya was sentenced to death and was publicly hanged on April the 3rd, 1881. Sofia Perovskaya became the first woman in Russia to be executed for a political crime. Vera Figner was a participant in repeated attempts on the emperor. She participated in the preparation of terrorist attacks on Alexander II in Odessa and St. Petersburg. When the emperor received news of arrest of Vera Figner, he exclaimed, "At last, this terrible woman is arrested." Vera Figner was sentenced to death. After confirmation, her sentence was replaced by eternal hard labor. At the beginning of the 20th century, women's participation in the preparation and execution of terrorist acts seriously increased. The leader of the party of left socialist revolutionaries, Maria Spiridonova, was one of them. On January the 16th, 1906, at the station in the city of Borisovlebsk, she shot 5 times and fatally wounded an advisor to the Tambov governor Luzhinovsky. On March the 12th, 1906, a visiting session of the Moscow Military District Court sentenced Maria Spiridonova to death by hanging. On March the 28th, she was informed about the replacement of the death penalty with eternal hard labor. At the nation's penal servitude, she learned about the fall of the monarchy in Russia. After the overthrow of the emperor and provisional government, Maria Spiridonova was one of the key figures who led the left socialist revolt on July 6, 1918. After an unsuccessful attempt to seize power, she was arrested by Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage and spent her later life in numerous exiles. What were the common features of women who committed anti-state crimes? Perhaps the relatively high social status and educational level pushed women to choose the path of the revolutionary struggle, because they could only reach their purposes through the most dangerous sphere, terrorism. The motive for their participation in revolutionary activities, according to their own explanation, often was sacrifice. For example, Maria Benevskaya, a member of the SR Party's militant organization, a Christian believer who made bomb but was injured in an accidental explosion, found justification for her activities in the Bible rather than in party programs. Women's participation in terrorist acts in Russian Empire in the late 19th, early 20th century was usually associated with attempts to change the state and legal system of Russia, to influence the government's choice of a new way of development of Russia. Ready for self-sacrifice, women defend human rights and freedoms using methods that are classified by Russian law as anti-state crimes. However, the attacks, as history has shown, led to a moral impasse. It was impossible to achieve universal happiness through the violence. With the beginning of the First World War, the ability of the government to maintain order in the society dramatically decreased. By the beginning of 1917, single image of enemy got a shape in the public mind. It was the supreme power and the police order that represented it. In February 1917, the imperial regime against which the revolutionaries were so active fell. The changes were received as if they had been eagerly anticipated by the public. Women turned to other forms of participation in the transformation of the Russian state. Thank you for your attention. Later, I'll be ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Vyacheslav. This was also a very interesting presentation. So now we are finished with the papers in this session, and I am opening up a discussion. We have heard many interesting subjects dating from the Middle Ages to the early 20th century, from the general inequality of women and men starting in the Middle Ages and perpetuated in the early modern age, to some extreme forms of women who displayed their discontent in terrorist attacks at the end of this period. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Feel free to turn on your microphone and ask what you want. While people are thinking, I just have some general thoughts that might connect a few of the papers. We've seen generally, on the one hand, an inequality of women and men in criminal law and in family law on the other, that we could see, and we could say that generally it is not the case anymore. We consider that men and women have equal rights today as parents and guardians and as defendants and people convicted of crimes, etc., etc. But is it really completely so? Because on the one hand, in family law, so Sada and Stepan have told us about guardianship rights, And we could also connect Dmitri's paper to this because he talked about the Serbian Civil Code, which in this respect, when it comes to guardianship rules, was pretty much based on the Austrian code. And there we have, of course, the priority of men, but only in the early years of the child, it is considered that the child should stay more with the mother because it's better for a small child, and it's also not the same for boys and girls, etc., etc. And then we can see, as we saw from Stepan's paper, that the idea of equality comes in the 20th century. But yet again, if we turn to today's family law, although men and women are equal in that respect, will probably agree that both most judges and most people, if you ask their opinion, will consider it better for a child to be left with the mother than with the father. We will generally talk about maternal instincts and so on and so forth. So even if we don't have a legal difference there, we do have a factual one in practice. And again, turning to criminal law, for example, I found it very interesting that Larisa said that in the Ruskaya Pravda, the fine was smaller for the murder of a woman, half of that for the murder of a man, but bigger if you insult a woman. So it's not such a pity if you kill a woman, but if you insult a woman's honor, it's worse than if you insult a man, though I presume that was also motivated as the man's family honor, but maybe Larissa could clarify that a little. It's an interesting issue. Then again, we know of laws in the Middle Ages which made no such difference, where murder was murder regardless of who the victim was and so on. And we know even of laws where it was the other way around. For example, in Germanic laws, if you remember the Salic law, the murder of a woman of childbearing age was fined more heavily than the murder of a man, and the murder of a pregnant woman was even considered a doubled murder. It was double the fine because both a woman and her unborn child were killed. So there are many interesting approaches there. And of course, the treatment of adultery that Veronica told about is also drastically different for women and for men. But as we saw, for example, in Vyacheslav's paper, many of those women revolutionaries, terrorists, whichever name we decide to use for them, who committed acts for which they were sentenced to death, had their sentence afterwards replaced with a milder one of lifetime imprisonment and hard labor. And we could probably presume, and Vyacheslav will correct me if I'm wrong, that it was done at least partly on the basis of their sex, so that their sentence was replaced because they were women, or rather that women in those cases were less frequently executed than men who had committed the same actions. And we can see a similar leniency towards women in other laws as well. And I think it also persists until today that we can see in criminal law a general tendency to consider women as less dangerous offenders, to maybe give them milder penalties. In many countries, we don't have the highest level of security in female prisons as we do in male prisons, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll stop now because I've started lecturing myself. I think I've opened a number of questions, and if anyone would like to answer or comment, that would be wonderful. Just please turn on your microphones. I think someone started talking with a muted microphone. Okay, I'll have to address people directly. So first, maybe the family law section. What do you think about this? equality and inequality of women and men as guardians.
I make a question. Why such a role was played by women in the attack of the king? Of just a minute.
Could you maybe just say it again a little more loudly so we could understand?
Women's were organizations of the terrorist attacks, and some of them they realized these terrorist acts and throw the bomb or sacrifice to reach the purposes of these terrorist organizations.
Did that answer your question, Larissa?
Thank you for your answer.
Okay. So maybe back to the family law now. I think maybe Sarah wanted to say something about the guardianship. No?
Well, I may have a few remarks on guardianship, if that's all right, even
Yes,
though
absolutely.
my submission regards the early modern law and not the modern one. Actually, the position of women in regards to guardianship wasn't as unequal as men. They actually could have been guardians, as I presented on the story. If you remember, this Elizabeth's sister actually claimed the guardianship upon her younger brother, only it wasn't very common. So usually women didn't do that, but there are some cases actually in the land register when we can see when women went as guardians. So I think in that case, their position was, we can even say, almost equal to men, because they could also claim the guardianship. So that was quite interesting, I think. If anyone wants to point out any other differences, then yes, but in land law at the time, it was almost equal.
In Austria, it was different too. In customary law, before the Austrian Civil Code entered into force, women had more possibilities to claim guardianship, but this was somehow reduced with the Austrian Civil Code. Yes, that's maybe something to add.
And Sarah, sorry, did I interrupt someone? There was a moment in your paper you said that mothers and paternal grandmothers could be guardians, and you said that from the materials we see that it was because they loved those children so much that they could be good guardians despite of their feminine intellectual problems. But then again, only if they are married. So how do these two factors balance out? So what, a single mother doesn't love her child as much as a married mother? Or what's the logic there?
I think the unmarried mother had no moral qualities, as I have said before. And it's also because of the family name. In the case of the parental grandmother, they think the child which carry on the family name is loved more by the paternal side than the maternal side. Yes. And I think the unmarried mother was not even worth discussing, because unmarried mothers at the time, yes, they were outcasts of society. They were not entrusted with the guardianship.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
Well, if I may just
Yes,
add to that a
absolutely.
bit, I think we can see a distinct difference between the law as it was and the actual social attitudes of the time, because if I'm not mistaken, it was theoretically possible for a single mother to be a guardian at some point under the Austrian Civil Code, but I doubt that anyone the court would do that, simply because the court was the ultimate decider of what was best for the interest of the child. So they would most likely consider the fact that the mother was unmarried and instead appoint someone different as a legal guardian. I also wanted to ask my colleague from Wien about the removal of the inequality in Austrian law, because you mentioned that it was some 40 years after the proposed changes before the First World War. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how that came to be and how that developed.
Yes, that was 60 years actually after the proposal of the women's rights movement in the early 1970s. And there was a huge family law reform. And with that, finally, the parents got shared parental rights and duties, and the unmarried mother the sole custody over an illegitimate child. Yes, in the 70s, there was a socialist government, and the women's organization of this government were quite strong, and they had in the program the equality of the genders, and then it was finally, yes, maybe finished the reform. I don't know how to say it better. Is the question answered? Or?
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
If I may,
Yes,
I was wondering with the situation that Stepan had in his paper. Well, the situation came from the fact that there was a need for unification of law in Czechoslovakia. Did something similar happen in Yugoslavia after the First World War?
We had a rather similar situation in Yugoslavia. There was a project for the Yugoslav Civil Code, and the draft was written based, again, mostly on the Austrian Civil Code, but also taking some modern elements from the German, from the Swiss Civil Code. So it was a compilation that was, again, never officially promulgated. It's considered by our jurists today to have been very good, and it probably would have been good had the that draft been passed. But there were first issues between different parts of the country. So on the one hand, we had the Croatia, Slovenia, who used to be a part of Austro-Hungary and who relied heavily, of course, on the Austrian Civil Code because it had been already in force in those parts of the country. And then on the other hand, we had former Serbia, Montenegro, who had their own civil codes, which were more or less based on the local customs, and then a particularly special situation in what is today Vojvodina, so the northern part of Serbia, which used to be a part of Hungary, which was the only part of Yugoslavia in which civil marriage was allowed because it had been so under Hungarian law. And of course, we had in many parts of the country, but most of all in today's Bosnia and Herzegovina, we had many Muslim families, which again had their own provisions under Sharia law. So it was precisely family law that was the largest problem in the codification of Yugoslav civil law. And just like in Czechoslovakia, that code was never passed, though I think it was not just the contents of the code, but also the political issues, because by the time that draft was finished in the 30s, there were already very many political problems in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, lots of conflicts between parties on both the national sides, mostly conflicts between Croats and Serbs, and on ideological sides, the Communist Party versus the monarchical parties and so on. So it was a large political mess, and the civil code simply didn't make it through all that. And then again, after World War II, the communist powers had a completely different conception of civil law, which of course brought many good things, including equality for women, but also lost some of the legacy of the older law. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
May I add that our project, Yugoslav Civil Code project, was influenced by Czechoslovakian projects. Also, some our solutions were taken from that project too, and the Commission gave in their how to say, they officially said that they used their project as, let's say, some pattern they want to create solutions.
Thank you. Anyone else?
May I ask Dmitry, why did he decide to write about Serbian civil code in his paper, in the topic of his paper? And are students on his university or in Russia learning something about Serbian civil code in the lectures?
Sorry about my internet connection lost in the one time. Please repeat. Will you repeat, please?
Yes, I can. So I asked you, why did you decide to write about Serbian civil code in your paper, and do students on your university learning something about it in the lectures?
Okay, I wrote about Serbian civil code because I like science of Slavistic, and I like Slavistic countries, and what about me? I tell I like to learn another countries which similar like Russian civil code. I think so.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you all. Any more questions? I might have a brief question for Veronica. You mentioned that testimony of Elizabeth's blacksmith lover against her as proof that she had lost her maiden's honor. Are there any other sources from the period that would tell us, is that a usual form of investigating such matters? Because, of course, as we all know, witnesses can lie. Any man could have some motivation or be bribed or whatever to come and lie how he slept with that woman and so on and so forth. So personally, as a judge, I wouldn't consider it too reliable a testimony. Was that the standard at the time, or do we not know?
Thank you. So yes, the testimonies were quite usual, although, as I said, there are not many cases regarding losing chastity at all. But usually there were like at least more than one, because if we look at the municipal law, I was talking about land law. But if you look at the municipal codifications, which are much more eloquent and which contain more articles concerning this topic, women, if there had been a question of losing her chastity or a rape, let's say, usually there was required to be more than one testimonies to conduct that. But in regards to the court, I didn't mention, but maybe perhaps I should, that the court actually was in favor of her sister. It wasn't really a fair trial on the matter. So you're right in that case, because her sister, Margaret Salomon, had some connections in the court. So I didn't mention it, but Elizabeth wasn't even allowed to testify herself, because she gave a testimony in which she agreed with all the accusation. It was back in the prison. So they took that and put it against her. So she wasn't even allowed to testify at the court. So this wasn't really fair. So you're right on that one. The court held against her wasn't really the normal way the land court would rule out the cases. So if that answers at least a bit the question, I hope.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's a very interesting case. Any more questions? Any comments? Vyacheslav, if you're still there, what about those death penalties? Do you have maybe, if not literally statistics, but some general impression from your research? Were women who were sentenced to death in those terrorist trials noticeably more frequently replaced with a lighter sentence with lifetime imprisonment and so on than men?
No, I haven't any statistics about this information, but because women who take part in terrorist attacks were not sentenced to death, because in most cases because social position of these women were accepted by the society, and if the authority decline and panic, maybe these women, the society tension very grow. Would grow.
Okay, thank you. So we can see a line there with more social than legal norms affecting such cases. Any more questions? It was a very interesting session. Anyone? If not, then I thank you all very much for the participation. I hope you will all submit your papers for publication in our journal. We are now taking a break.